So let's chat to Owen Nkomo now. He's the CEO of Inkunzi Wealth Group. He joins me now via Skype. Very good evening to you, Owen. Thanks indeed for your time. So government revenue has been taking a pounding. There's a very gloomy economic outlook. So the minister is floating with this idea. Would this just be a good show of solidarity, with those economically impacted by the coronavirus from what the minister is suggesting?
Griselda and the viewers, I certainly think that it would just be, in my humble view, it will just be, a solidarity exercise for the government to talk about ministers and the DDGs reducing their salaries, because it's just a very small part of what the total government wage bill is. The total government wage bill is almost 700 billion rands in the country, and I think that is where we need to be having a conversation around. If we are to make meaningful changes, I don't believe that the ministerial and directorate salaries exceed R1 billion rands. Could be wrong, but I think that if we need to make a broader change, we need to be talking about the broader government wage bill.
And that's what I want to talk about. I mean, the government wage bill remains severely bloated and accounts for the largest portion of the national budget. I mean, you're also, of course, of the view that perhaps this should be extended to civil servants. Have we not seen this in countries like Greece, for example?
Yes, we saw that in the so-called PIGS, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain. About 5-6 years ago, at the peak of the crisis, that called for the governments to pump money into the economies out there. Those countries did the most stringent measures to reduce government expenditure, and one of those was reducing government salaries in some of those countries. And I do think that, just giving an example, Griselda, at the moment, if we're looking at a wage bill of 675 billion rands, if you were to increase that wage bill, you're basically going to be needing 35 billion rands to 40 billion rands if you're increasing it by inflation. But if you say we're having a difficult time and some members of the community, particularly people in the private sector, are losing jobs, so it means they're going to 0% salary. Some are being forced to take a 25, 30% or even 50% salary cut. So why don't we as a country collectively realize that the government sector, the government employees, also potentially have a role to play in reducing the burden of cost to the state, because we have the wage bill as being the biggest number on our budget, and then you've got the interest costs, and then you've got to allocate money to all these other departments that must work effectively. I think everyone has a role to play, Griselda, in helping the government reduce these costs.
But look, you also have some members of parliament saying that they wouldn't need to consider this if some of the billions that have been looted from the state coffers are actually paid back. That would also seem to be somewhat of a valid concern coming from them, I guess.
100%. And I think, as we have seen, we have taken to Twitter, to the radio stations, to TV as the citizens of the country, and we've said we must start fighting corruption in government. We cannot lose billions at a critical time like this in the country at risk. We need to stop corruption so that we don't lose money out of the fiscus, and we don't need to go outside the country to borrow money to help us meet our costs. I think corruption, in my humble view, takes away quite a lot from whatever money is collected through GDP. And it takes a lot as well from the opportunity cost of us potentially bringing in more money into the country. If a country has less corruption, investors are always happy to put money to work in that particular country, whether it's local or offshore investors. And I think we must just deal with corruption decisively and stop talking about dealing with it. We need to start putting people in jail for corruption.
There had also been a suggestion, but not from the Minister of Finance, though, that this could also be extended perhaps to executives of large companies. But when I spoke to you earlier, you said, this doesn't immediately put money in the coffers of the state.
Yes, it doesn't, because remember, if you force executive in companies to reduce the salaries, you're essentially reducing the tax bill, the collective tax from their salaries. So instead, what you want to do is have a different conversation with business and say, listen, let's have a tax conversation that gives you incentives to maybe pay some of your tax forward, and we'll do assessments in a year or two on average to make sure that whatever maybe you decide to contribute this year, which you are going to contribute next year, might get a discount at this stage. Obviously, the tax mechanism doesn't make provisions for that at this stage, but we're living in an environment where we need to think and try to do different interventions to make sure that the government can actually get tax. So a company that was supposed to pay maybe 100 million rands in tax next year, the government says maybe 50% of that, if you were to pay that upfront, you can get a certain discount. But it immediately puts money into the government's coffers in the period that we're talking about. And those are the kind of things I think we must be engaging the private sector on. Cutting their salaries actually does the opposite of what we're trying to achieve.
All right, Owen Nkomo, thank you very much indeed. CEO of Inkunzi Wealth Group, thanks indeed for your time this evening on the program.